Well, hello there, and welcome back to our series of videos on the topic of reproduction in plants. Now remember in class, we had a chance to share our holiday research on different flowers. Some of the flowers that you guys researched were insect-pollinated flowers, while others were wind-pollinated flowers. And we saw the differences between their structure. So this video is just to summarize some of what we have learned through your research. In case you missed anything in class, you can write it down in your notes. Alright, so one of the flowers that some of you might have researched was the hazelnut flower. Hazelnut very famous because of the hazelnut chocolate spread, Nutella or Nutella or Nutella, whatever you want to pronounce it as. Anyway, the hazelnut plant has flowers which are wind-pollinated. And some of the common features of wind-pollinated flowers can be seen here. So here are the male flowers of the hazelnut tree. Okay, it turns out that the hazelnut tree has unisexual flowers. So here are the male flowers, and here are the female flowers. So take a look at the male flowers first. You notice that the stamens are long and pendulous. Pendulous like pendulum, right? So hanging out. Yeah, long and hanging out. And that allows it to release the pollen more easily when the wind blows past it. And notice that the pollen is also produced in greater abundance. So more pollen needs to be produced because it's going to be carried by the wind, and the wind carries the pollen by chance. It might land in a drain, it might land in a pond. So you need to produce more pollen. So pollen, more abundant. And notice the structure of the pollen. Quite a smooth kind of surface, easily carried by the wind. So it tends to be quite a bit smaller as well, lighter, so the wind can carry it further. Now next, turn your attention to the female flowers. So the female flowers are some of the typical features of wind-pollinated flowers. The stigma, large and feathery, right? Very hairy, feathery looking, protruding out of the plant, right? So that any pollen that kind of drifts its way will get easily trapped in the stigma. And notice also that there are not many petals, right? Not many petals. Petals are small and dull or missing, right? And that's because wind-pollinated flowers, we don't need to attract those insects or animals to pollinate us. We just need the wind. So no need for bright and colorful petals. Alright, so we also have, on the other hand, insect-pollinated flowers. And the example that some of your research was the primrose flower, very famous for primrose oil. Now, typical features of insect-pollinated flowers would be your brightly colored petals and the presence of nectar and scent. And all these serve to attract pollinators, to attract insects like the bee or butterflies to the flower, so that the insects would carry some of the pollen. As they're drinking the nectar, some of the pollen kind of just rubs off onto the insect and they carry it to another flower. So notice also that there might also be nectar guides. Now nectar guides are kind of some patterns that you sometimes see on the petals, and they're basically like a guide to tell the insects, hey, here, come here for the nectar, nectar here, come and get it, right? To tell them how to go into the flower so that they would be in the correct position for the pollen to rub off onto them. Now finally, the stamens and the stigmas are small and compact. Right? Usually they're found inside the flower, right? They're not large and pendulous hanging out of the flower. They're not large and feathery protruding out of the flower. Okay, so an interesting question is that the primrose flower actually comes in two forms, right? This thermite form, you notice the stamen at the top and the stigma at the bottom. And then there's this pinnate form where the stigma is now in the top and now the stamen at the bottom. So think about why there are two flower forms. It's kind of not really a related question, but it's also something to do with pollination. I want you to think of some ideas. Now, one last thing to say about insect-pollinated flowers is that their pollen, right? The pollen tends to be have more rough kind of surfaces. Some of them have hooks on them, so that they can hook on to insect bodies. So they tend to also be a bit larger than those wind-pollinated pollen. Alright, so just a quick recap of all the points that we've seen in the examples using a table. So insect-pollinated flowers, the petals tend to be large and brightly colored, right, to be attractive. Now wind-pollinated flowers, we don't need to be attractive, we just use the wind. So usually the petals are small, dull, or sometimes even missing. In insect-pollinated flowers, the stigma, right, tends to be small and compact. But in wind-pollinated flowers, it tends to be large, pendulous, protruding out, feathery, right? And the whole point is to increase the surface area so that we can trap as much pollen as possible that might be just floating around in the air. Next, in terms of the stamen, right, the insect-pollinated flowers again, they're usually not pendulous, they don't protrude out small, they're small and compact. Right, the wind-pollinated ones, the stamens tend to be long and pendulous, protruding out of the flower so that the pollen can be easily blown away and dispersed by the wind. As I've already mentioned, the insect-pollinated pollen tends to be larger with rougher surfaces that can cling onto pollinators. And for wind-pollinated flowers, the pollen tends to be smaller, smoother, and more easily blown about. And also produced in greater numbers, right, because the wind carries by chance. But insects, well, it tends to be a bit more accurate when you use insects, so they just go from one flower to another flower. Right, finally, for insect-pollinated flowers, they tend to have nectar, right, tend to have some sort of nectar there to attract insects. And nectar guides may be present in the petals to guide the insects into the flower. Wind-pollinated flowers, nah, usually don't need any of this nectar stuff. Save resources, right? Save energy, don't need to produce. The insect-pollinated flowers tend to have scent, so fragrant, sweet smelling. But wind-pollinated flowers tend to just be odorless or have no smell at all. Now, before we end, just an interesting picture to share with you guys. So this is what I was talking about, the nectar guides. Sometimes there are little patterns in the flower petals to attract and to show insects where to go to get the nectar. But if you take a look at this flower here, it kind of looks very plain, right? There's not really any arrows or nectar guides. But if you place it under UV light, you'll see very clearly that there are these patterns which guide the insects into the center of the flower. And that's because bees are able to see UV light. So to them, this is what the flower looks like, but to us, it looks like this. Alright, so at the end of this video, I hope that you have a very clear idea what are the differences in structure between the insect and wind-pollinated flowers. And it's a very, very important part of this topic. It usually comes out very often in the exams as well, so make sure you're very clear on that. I would like you now to end off by reading your textbook. It's quite a number of pages, but your textbook contains two examples, two types of flowers. One is the clitoria flower. Sounds a bit interesting, right? Clitoria. And it's this flower here. Very nice blue flower. It's insect-pollinated, as you probably have guessed by now, looking at its brightly colored petals. It's actually quite interesting. This is actually used in those dye that they use to make blue color kueh kueh. So take a look at that in your textbook. It will tell you how the clitoral flower is adapted for insect pollination. And then there's this other example, the Ischimum muticum, right? Very interesting name, try to say that. The seashore centipede grass is this flower here. Your textbook will talk about how it's adapted for pollination. And in its particular case, this is adapted for wind pollination. It's actually just a grass, quite ordinary, boring looking, but has some interesting adaptations as well. So have a look at these as another two examples that you can know by name whenever you're asked to describe insect-pollinated or wind-pollinated flowers. Alright, that's all. Happy reading!